I joke and I say that I've built a gym for death, that you don't always go to the gym.
Yeah.
Um, but you just
Oh,
tap in when you feel like you need to. And that all of these dialogues that we have
mhm.
get people a little bit more limber.
Mm.
And they're like, and the outcome is a healthier death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh,
I love that. Hi, I'm Xian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. Welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution podcast.
We are so excited to welcome Laura Cleminson today. She is a community organizer from New Hampshire, USA, and the founder of the Pre-Dead Social Club, an organization working on keeping the dialogue alive. You've also been a death doula, a hospice volunteer, and previously worked in a medical device company for heart failure patients. So welcome to the show,
Mm.
Laura.
yeah, super excited. Like I feel like I'm a fangirl of both of you guys. So
Uh,
thank you so much for inviting me for this conversation.
it is our pleasure. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to hear about what all of that means that Cian just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I kind of thought maybe we could start with before you did all these things and were leaning into this death and dying culture, you were working at a medical device company. And I'm just curious,
Mm,
did you have any experiences working in that field that led you to think about the
mm.
connection with how people, face an illness and I guess, yeah, live with a life-changing diagnosis?
That is a fantastic question. I am not an engineer, so I was a program manager for
Mhm.
a medical device company. And actually, what we were looking to accomplish is a pulsatile flow heart pump when people are on getting open heart surgery, that
Mhm.
they would have better outcomes. So, what I find fascinating, the short answer to this question is you're really excited about being in an organization that um, I want to use the word saves lives because
Yeah.
we so are cued into doing that.
Mhm.
But I don't look at it as saving lives anymore. I look
Mhm.
at it as extending a life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when you extend a life, you do it in hopes that that person's quality of life
Mhm.
is better. And uh, I recently in communication with the CEO of that company, and I was like, I'm now looking at the work that I did back then versus what I'm doing now as a death doula. It gives me pause to
Mhm.
really look at what we're doing in modern medicine.
Mhm.
And so honestly, it was the reverse. It was
Mhm.
after all of this, you do this look back, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, you know, uh, you feel so good about doing something awesome for people, but now it's like maybe there's different choices I would make because my world is bigger in my
Mm.
Yeah.
viewpoint on there.
So you touched on it, like what made you want to become a death doula?
Mm. So my mom was diagnosed 8, 9 years ago with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And nobody in my family had experienced supporting somebody dying.
Mhm.
I would say 99% of the people in our family died instantly, which is
Mm,
kind of shocking. So,
Mhm.
and then in supporting her through the 9 months that she lived, I noticed that everybody in my family navigated death very differently. My mom was honestly, she was brilliant. And my dad and my sister uh, were really, they would do what they needed to do, but they didn't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
And then after my mom died, my dad's health started to change. And I was like, okay. And they live in Wisconsin. I'm out in New Hampshire, just like, this is how are we going to support this man?
Mhm.
Um, And so there was a lot of effort to try to engage in this conversation, but I wasn't making any progress.
Hmm.
And so at one point in time, and I just said, I think I need better skills. I don't know how to do this. And so I did a deep dive, and I started off being a hospice volunteer, and then went on and expanded into being a death doula. Um, and then one step further is in working in my community. I looked, I'm like, okay, I could receive everybody uh, who's interested in working with a death doula the same way our medical community does and hospice. And uh, I don't know that I think I'll get burnt out.
Mm.
Just like 99% of their people is like, I think that there's something more important for me to do. And it was like upstream. It's backing up the bus. It's like, I would love it if we could be more prepared and also meet our medical community halfway, and as opposed to having them do this lift. So as a social experiment, I started the Pre-Dead Social Club. I'm like, oh, let's see if anybody shows up.
Tell us about that. I'm so
Oh,
curious.
well, so Pre-Dead Social Club,
Love the name,
um,
by the way.
thank you. Uh, Everybody does. I say everybody does. People chuckle first, which is like, okay, how many people laugh when they use the word dead in anything? So the mission of the Pre-Dead Social Club is to get multiple generations around the same table long before there's a serious diagnosis,
Mm.
because I believe we all have our own um, practical wisdom in this, but we're so not used to using it, or it's tucked away in some corner we forgot we even had it. So the intention is that we're going to meet people where they're at by hosting a variety of events. Um, and so, for instance, we do a thing called Death Over Drinks, where you're not required to drink, but we would like you to talk about death. And we host things. It's a riff off of a death cafe, but we've put our own spin on it, in that we do it at a place where people normally would gather, as well as we create the environment where we talk about an icebreaker question, as opposed to everybody coming with their own questions. And then it's very disparate. So I'm like, how many? It was more an observation on our part. When you start with one topic, you get to share perspectives from 8 or 9 people in your small group, and people are like, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Or can you tell me a little bit more? And then we do things like deadlines, creative obituary writing workshops. We started a roundtable discussion series called We Wish We Knew That, where we invite our medical community or the funeral industry, everybody is like, oh, we wish we would have known that outcome could have been better. And then the pre-dead, the patient and their family is like, oh, we wish we would have known that, we would have asked for that. So and then in 2025, we're going to be launching a series called I'm Practically Dying, which will allow people to tap in all the practical things of dying, but also add the death doula piece of things. Yeah, so anyhow, we're trying to be really creative, build a bunch of bridges within our community. And just for reference, in a year and a half that we've been doing this, there's been 500 people that have been plugged into what we're doing.
Wow.
And 300 of those people actively show up at our community events.
Amazing.
And it's like, I share that. It's like, if you just look at that number in and of itself, it's like, a couple hundred, whatever people, but like, there's no advertising. This is
Mhm.
word of mouth. And people reach out personally and say, thank you for providing something like this, because we're secular. We're not related to any medical or religious. It's kind of like we
Mhm.
need a place for people to feel very neutral.
Mhm.
And people have told friends, neighbors, they've brought their spouses. Um, people, I joke and I say that I've built a gym for death, that you don't always go to the gym,
Yeah.
um, but you just
Oh.
tap in when you feel like you need to. And that all of these dialogues that we have
Mhm.
get people a little bit more limber.
Mm.
And they're like, and the outcome is a healthier death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh,
I love that.
so that was a long description of
No, I love it because this season of our podcast is all about meeting people like
mm,
yourself who are trying to be a catalyst in their community. And it's in a way,
Mhm.
it's sort of the power of one. But
Mhm.
really, like Sammy and I feel like, the power of one plus one, in a way, we just had a mission and we just started to put out our message. But when you do that, we're opening up conversations. And
Mhm.
what your own personal story of saying, I didn't have the skills or the language is what we feel everybody who enters on this journey on healthcare feels. And so we're trying to equip people with skills. And I love what you're doing because as a death doula, I feel like people meet them very late or didn't even know what they are. And you're going upstream and doing the education, which is what
yeah,
we're trying to do. So we love the ideas and all the creative ways that community can come together and talk about this. And I think in Australia they talk about death literacy and compassionate communities. And people are like, well, I can't do that, but yes, you can. So I love your story, Laura, of what you're doing. And if we think of it, start small, but it can grow and grow.
You know
yeah.
what? And I think 500 people is no small shakes. Like when, think about it. When's the last time you got up in front of an audience of 500 people that showed up to participate in something? Like it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a
Uh,
lot of people.
Yeah.
yeah. And what struck me about what you were describing is it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that most of the people that engage with your programs, let's just say,
Mhm.
um, do not have a diagnosis yet.
Mm. No, that awesome question, observation is the profile of the folks that show up
Yeah.
are late 20s to early 90s. And some people have a stage 4 diagnosis.
Okay.
And some people, so that's also good to know in the sense that there are people who are currently caregivers,
Mm,
or that they are navigating the landscape of a declining parent with their siblings that live all
mm,
over the place. And maybe that's not going so well. Or
yeah.
maybe the bulk of it is falling on their shoulders and there's like, where do I go? So it is a diverse group. And honestly, one of the things that we talk about in any of our events is we invite everybody to leave their career at the door,
Mm,
because you're just somebody who's going to die someday.
mm,
Um, and we have people from the medical community, from the funeral industry, but it's like, yeah, you guys, like, give your career a break. You're gonna die. How often do you get to talk about these things for yourself?
yeah.
Yeah. As a
Yeah.
You
person,
know?
as a human being.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
But the reason why I was asking you about sort of the average person who comes to your
Mm,
events, and it sounds like it's a lot of diversity, is because Cian and I had a hypothesis that
mm,
because we wanted to go upstream as well. And
mhm,
when people are just stepping onto the, the journey of having a life-changing diagnosis, our hypothesis was that they were at a different place of readiness to
mm,
talk so overtly about dying, death, palliative, hospice, because they were just starting. Um,
mm,
and that
mm,
people who were just part of the general public are probably quite interested in talking about dying and death, and it's not as threatening to them because they are not themselves in an early diagnosis. So, but it's interesting that you say, because you are calling it for what it is, you're talking about dead, dying, death, you're using all the words, and you have quite a mixture of people coming to your events from different stages. So it's just very interesting.
I think that it's fair to say that we get very few death curious people, meaning that it's like, oh, that's interesting. I think that would be an interesting topic to talk about. It's not to say that we don't have that. And if we do, it's typically younger people. But the average age is midlife, I would say.
Okay.
Sandwich
Um,
generation.
yeah. And it really is a complete mix of people. And people share, like, one of the topics that we have for Death Over Drinks was what informs your view of death. And that was a learning opportunity, just to hear, you know, well,
Where
how
people
did
think
people
it
get
comes
here?
from. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's interesting because I was a guest on someone's podcast recently, and they said at the end, oh, it was Hospice Nurse Penny, actually, from social media. Anyway, she said, we ask everyone this. I'm like waiting for, a question I haven't, that I've been asked a lot of things. But
Yeah.
anyway, she said something like, this is the coffin question. I'm like, okay. She said, how do you want to be buried? And it took me a few minutes. And she said to me, you're kidding me, Sammy, you haven't thought about how you want to be buried? And like, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be like that? And I said, I'm so embarrassed. I spend so much time talking about dying that the dead part I give very little attention to. But to your point, I think people want to talk about where their ideas have come from that have shaped their perception of what the end of life looks like. What does, dying look like? How much have they thought about their own death,
Right.
and what they want for themselves? Yeah.
I would say that people wouldn't necessarily language it that way. To, like, I would like to explore what my viewpoint is, but that
Yeah.
is a part of what they're doing
Mm.
in that process. And also, um, I don't call anything that I do death education.
Mm-hmm.
No, it is, because I feel as though there's we use that term,
Mm-hmm.
death literacy, death
Mm-hmm.
education, but folks out there, if you say we want to educate you on death, you're like, I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm cautious about language
Yeah.
in when invitations go out.
Oh, because I mean, you have the D words all over your programs. So,
Absolutely.
so
I'm
is it in the description of what you're inviting them to that makes them
Oh,
feel,
let me clarify. It's like, we're
yeah,
not afraid to use the word. Actually, I intentionally use the word dead, dying, death in everything, as opposed
yeah.
to any euphemisms. But I would never, in a description of a program, to say this is death education.
Oh, I see.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
love that because we've learned, how important language is and inviting. And in
Hmm.
fact, we were talking, I've never been to a death cafe or a dialogue. Can you believe that? And I know about them and I know how they're really an example of a social movement that started in the UK and has spread all over the world. And as you know, the waiting room revolution is a social movement. But I feel like there's this misconception of what it is and what you talk, and you've done a little bit about what you talk about, but maybe can you share maybe a story or some examples of what people might think it is, and when they get there, this is what you actually do, or some of the surprising kinds of discussions that you end up talking about. Because I think the average person might be like, that's not for me, or it would be intimidated by the term dialogue or death cafe.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're trying to
Right.
change that. Yeah.
Yeah. So your question is what I could how I would describe what a what a death over drinks looks
Yeah.
like and feels like. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe a story of like what, what you guys talk about, or someone who might have said, "I thought it was this, but it was really this." Because we
Mm-hmm.
get that all the time with our book, right? People think we did talk about palliative care. I was so scared, palliative care. I thought you were gonna just, pull the plug
Mm,
on me. And in fact, when we get there, we what they offer is you finally saw me, and they're so excited. So it's kind of I wonder if it's the same kind of thing. It must be the same kind of thing with dialogues. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spread all over the world.
right. I think I can honestly say I don't know. And I talked to like our death over drinks. There's usually 30 people in
Mm-hmm.
attendance. I get to know everybody, and that I haven't really heard people saying, "Yeah, this isn't what I thought it was going to be." What
Mm.
I have heard is this is interesting. And I mean, even though that we describe that you're going to break out into a group of, 8 or 9 people, um, the aha moments are, wow, I really enjoyed hearing how everybody else around my table answered that one question.
Mm.
And so the surprising thing, I think, were two things. A, it's not a grief session, that
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
people are not, it's not to say that people don't get verklempt because we're talking about a tender
Mm-hmm.
subject, but that how welcoming and how many other stories that people share that they see themselves. So they are seeing that there's other people out there, even though that they've got this narrow view at the moment because they're in the weeds, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But also just the variety of approaches to one thing helps people um, just maybe just even invite more conversation.
Mm.
One of the topics we had was how important language is, and I asked the group, everybody has heard of DNR, and
Mm-hmm.
read nods, and I said, how many people here have heard of AND?
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, there's one person, but she
Mm-hmm.
was a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, what is AND? I'm like, allow natural death. And they're like, that's a thing. I go, yeah, it's not really well adopted, but let's talk about if you had to ask somebody DNR versus AND, just sit with that for a moment and now talk about that within your group. It was just profound that
Mm.
there were people saying, I've actually, a young woman had uh, was brought back to life,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, I think about A&D. I don't know if I'd use the word A&D for my 8-year-old child, but for my 80-year-old parent, A&D.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just um, there's just kind of some big topics that we talk about, and you just
Mm-hmm.
see where people go. Um, I'm not sure if I hope I answered your
Yeah, no, I
question.
Yeah.
love it.
You
Thank
know,
you.
for the listeners, DNR, do not resuscitate. Um,
Correct. Yeah.
and AND, allow natural death. Okay, well, what are some of the other prompts you might use
Mm. Um,
just to get to stir up
yeah,
the
yeah.
convo?
Yeah. One of the other ones that we just did this week had to do with um, caregiving.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
And actually, there was a a little homework. We had some people do some writing assignments. Is like, look at these 40 tasks that caregivers do. Now, indicate, uh, check by, which you're willing to do, which do you know how to do, and which that you're kind of uh, not quite sure, and
Mm-hmm.
have in mind who it is that you would be caregiving for or who would be
Mm.
caregiving for you. It
mm.
was a fascinating conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple takeaways from that. Is people are like, really? This is this whole bucket of, yeah, that bucket is big. And you know what? If you
Mm-hmm.
talk about it in advance and you have this open conversation when nobody is sick, you can say, like to my partner, Jeff, I'm like, I'm not willing to do this stuff for you.
Mm-hmm.
What could we plan? Like who else could we tap?
Yeah.
Or yeah, because the caregiving, as we talk about, is dying is a process, death is an event. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
really talk about the process. So that was a really rich conversation
Mm-hmm.
that people shared their own personal different stories on as well. Um,
I think that's
we've
a really important exercise, actually, because it's not about who loves you the most, who will be able to fulfill all of those uh, roles, right, of the caregiver. And I find that when it gets to who is going to provide intimate care, when I can no longer care for myself, like bathing and toileting and those kinds of things, that becomes a very interesting conversation, because a person might say, no, I don't want my son doing that. And the son might
right,
say, yeah, we love each other so much, best mom in the world, but I'm just not, that's not us. And
yeah,
you don't want to wait until you're in that situation, scrambling to find out, we're on the verge of needing intimate care here, and find out that the person who's been labeled caregiver
mhm,
is not feeling comfortable. So I love that you are getting people to think about, exactly what you said, like what do they understand about the role? What about all these different tasks? What are they willing to do? What, do they need more information about? What do they feel uncomfortable about? That's really important. Good for
right.
you.
Well, also part of there was a little quiz, if you will, that I asked people. I said, if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness today, who would be your caregiver or caregivers?
Hmm.
And, who are they? What's their relationship, and how far away do they live?
Mm.
And so I just kind of polled the group. I said, how many people said 0 to 1, 1? Because uh, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, and there's some people that might not know who would that be for them, right?
Mm.
This was a pretty activated group, and a few of them had 2 or 3. I'm like, good for you guys,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Uh, but the other piece, the other takeaway is, now that you guys have kind of gone through this exercise, and you now you don't need caregiving, your people don't need caregiving, but you have a friend who is really in the trenches of caregiving right now. You can look at this and say, this is what I'm willing and able to do, because you get this little, what some of these tasks are, as
Hmm.
opposed to the uncomfortableness that we have is like, what can I do for you? Or call me if you need something. You
Mm.
can be more proactive, but you be
Yeah,
proactive in a comfortable area,
in a
uh,
practical way,
in a
as
practical
opposed to
way.
like just a philosophical way. Let me know
Exactly.
what I can do is very
Right.
different than, I'd really like to get your groceries for you, and,
Yeah.
drop your daughter off at preschool, every
Yeah.
Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people have told us that they prefer that people just offer up like that, as opposed to just say, call me if you need me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Laura, I'm really curious for you to tell us, just like high level, what does a week at a glance look like for someone like you? What do you do in a typical week in your roles?
So thank you for asking that. I there's a lot of administrative behind the scenes
Okay.
things
Mm-hmm.
that need to happen. I continue to do a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
I send out 4 newsletters a month,
Wow.
and they're bite-sized.
Mm-hmm.
And they all have a different topic or theme, but they're curated so people can grasp onto little things, because we're busy.
Mm-hmm.
Of which uh, 70% of the people that get sent to open it up and read it, which I think is an amazing statistic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also working on a lot of programming for 2025. I spend a lot of time researching and thinking about these monthly death over drinks to make
Mm-hmm.
them as rich as possible
Mm-hmm.
with the icebreaker questions and working on expanding that so when people leave death over drinks, they also have some tools and
Mm-hmm.
some next steps.
A loot bag.
Um, I'm also get ready to. I've been invited to be a speaker at at the university here at different events.
Your
Uh,
TEDx talk, the TEDx
oh
talk, Smart
yeah,
Smith.
TEDx
Yes.
talk.
Which
That
I've
was a
watched. It was awesome. What was that like? Being the speaker, what was the reaction like, and what happened? That whole experience like?
the whole experience was probably uh, 5 months of like
Oh.
this is a pretty I spoke in front of 850 people
Mm.
and the audience was amazing. um I think when you get up and you speak about something that is so personal, it has the roots in something very personal, but you do have what you believe is this big idea. It's this culmination of a lot of emotions. But one of the things at the break, I was right before lunch. You go outside and everybody's out on this big, uh, anyhow, not a lawn, a big
Yeah.
Veranda.
drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not like the 850 people are eating sandwiches.
Okay.
And yeah, and this guy stopped me and he goes, I just want to say I really enjoyed your talk. And my mom last week just wanted to talk about her end of life plans, and I blew her off because I didn't really think, like, I don't really want to talk about that, mom, and that's not important. And I'm like, what is your name? And he tells me his name, and I'm like, what are you gonna do now? And he goes, I'm gonna talk to my mom. I go, awesome.
Mm.
And so it just the interaction afterwards and people just reaching out in our community talking about how impactful that was, that they could see it, this conversation from a lot of different viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Hmm.
perhaps has moved people further down the road to being more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't think that's a stretch to say that. um,
Yeah, I think you take people from what would be described as contemplative to action. Um, they're not pre-contemplative. Uh, well, maybe someone who just randomly shows up to something might be pre-contemplative. Then they're contemplative. They're thinking about it after they hear you. But most of the people coming are thinking about something related to this. So they're already contemplative. And by the time they leave, you put them into action, which is
yeah.
wonderful. How so many of our listeners wouldn't know how someone ends up doing a TEDx. So how did you end
Oh,
up doing a TEDx?
yeah, so there's a whole application. So the theme this year was being human.
Okay.
Okay, so for our particular TEDx in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they have a huge application process. So
Mm-hmm.
you submit a written application, and if you pass, if you catch their attention at that level, they bring you in for an audition.
Hmm.
And if you pass that, you get invited. I forget how many people, if there was like a couple hundred people, I think it was 300 people. They selected 12 people for the day.
Wow.
Yeah,
Good for you.
yeah. So, and the one thing is giving a talk is different than giving a speech.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
It is to write something down is different than delivering it extemporaneously. And
Mm-hmm.
giving a TED Talk is the blend of both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
well, I've watched it. It's excellent, and I hope our viewers and listeners check it out. And you talk about about the story of the Pre-Dead Social Club and your personal story, which you've done here. So thank you. We're almost at the end of time. I just wanted to, talk about our
Sorry,
book.
can I
No.
just I have to say, so for the listeners, I'm holding up the book Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest. Honestly, I can't remember how I found you guys, but I'm just like, oh, I have this bookmarked 1,000 different ways, highlighted. But there's a lot of really awesome books out there where I think you guys have tipped the scales. Is you have created a partnership with the rest of the world by giving them tools and language and stories to give them permission to activate and to advocate for themselves. And what I think is the most important is that you come from a medical background, and that is this there's this hierarchy when you go into the doctor's office, and as from your viewpoint, you're like, no, it's okay, please do this. We don't hear that often enough, and I think that is one of the biggest gifts of this book.
That's high praise. Thank you. It's wonderful. That's exactly what we were trying to do, is tip the scales a bit, and lessen the power gap and make patients and families understand that they have rights and they're better off if they become respectfully activated in their illness journey, as opposed to being passive and just letting the system decide, what's going to happen with them, or relinquish all of their agency to healthcare providers. Then they end up spit out at the end, not recognizing themselves and feeling very out of control. So thank you for finding us, and thank you for loving our book and marking it like that. Sienna and I are the book is, still in its first year. And so we're starting to see people show up at our talks with the book looking just like yours, with all these tabs sticking out of it or highlighted. And that is so exciting for us. Yeah. So you're actually part of our revolution, and you may not have even known it, but welcome.
I could, on page 14, when you say we need to stop pulling people out of the river, we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. When I read that, I'm like, these are my people.
Now that's not our quote.
I know that.
Desmond Tutu.
It's on page 14. It is not your quote. You're absolutely right. It's Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yes. But at least we shone light on that quote.
But you know what, Laura? That's exactly what this season was, to meet community, people in our revolution. Whether they're using our book, or not. But you are, because of the ethos of what you're doing, everything that you're doing in your week of going upstream and meeting pre-dead people and normalizing this topic of dying and death. So we're so grateful to chat with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Wait, Sian, don't you want to tell Laura about our workbook?
Oh, he has actually.
Okay, fine.
And I was going to say, I'm super excited to get my hands on it. And to see what the vision is on that, and put that into some practical applications in our community over here.
Well, we can't wait to hear what you think of it.
Well, I'm super grateful for the work that you guys are doing and the conversations that you're starting and inviting us to start as well. So
you too. I think that it's been great that your camera has been fuzzing in and out. It gives this whole
Earth to Mars here.
No, deadlines and death cafe and pre-dead, and it's like this. There's an aura around you. That's a death doula. That
Well,
outer space.
Thank you for finding time to chat with us today, Laura.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
look forward to connecting with you guys down the road.
Keep up
Absolutely.
with the awesome work.
Thank you.